Qiao and Hao grabbed onto Lu Jinian's elbow when they walked down the stage. Facing the crowd, they raised their glass to toast before walking silently to a corner, leaving the guests to Enroshu and Zhou Wanli. Even though there weren't many people in the corner, there were still some walking around. In order to prevent suspicion, they stood silently, careful not to make conversation, exposing themselves. When they were greeting the audience, Lu Jinian had drank a lot in place of Qiao and Hao. Before the dinner, he hadn't eaten. He slouched against the sofa as his stomach started to hurt. The mood in the main hall was boisterous, with laughter erupting again and again. As she listened on to the continuous chatter and laughter, Qiao and Hao recalled the scene before the celebration had begun. Lu Jinian had walked to the side of the car to smoke in silence after Enroshu and Zhou Wanli had ignored him. Her heart clenched, and she turned to look at him. Lu Jinian was currently leaning against the sofa with his eyes shut. Even though his face was filled with scars and had been touched up slightly to look like Zhou Jiamu, she could still see past all the facade, seemingly able to make out at his perfect visual. Qiao and Hao's eyes turned tender as she stared at him. As she looked, her mind started to show the image of Lu Jinian. As his face formed in her mind, her lips curled into a tiny smile. In the end, Qiao and Hao sunk into a daze, her expression tender and loving. When Lu Jinian's stomach was feeling better, he opened his eyes and collided right with Qiao and Hao's deep gaze. Her stare was intense and slightly intoxicated. Lu Jinian's heart skipped a beat. He was unable to look away. Her eyes were clear and beautiful, and reflected in them, he could see Zhou Jiamu. He frowned, freezing for a few seconds before remembering that he was in Zhou Jiamu's disguise. Was that why she was looking at him with such an expression? She had mistaken him for Zhou Jiamu. How could he forget? She would lower her lashes or look elsewhere whenever she looked at him, but now she was looking straight into his eyes. Lu Jinian felt his heart tighten and throb as though someone had stabbed it. Pain spread through his body and his eyes dimmed. He forced his gaze away, hiding from her harmful eyes. Qiao and Hao had no idea that Lu Jinian's reaction was because of her. She was still deep in thought, unable to snap out of her daze as she continued to stare at him. Even though he had diverted his gaze, he could still feel her stare. His lips started to feel dry, the voice recording playing in his mind repeatedly. In my whole life, I will love you the most. In my whole life, I will only love you. Lu Jinian trembled, then abruptly stood up.